Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to UTA Visiting Artist Series. My name is Stephen Laptisapone from the Art and Art History Department at UT Arlington. We will have a live stream today of our visit with Michelle Rawlings, our visiting artist for the day. We really appreciate all of you tuning in, and it's a new territory for us doing this online, but we hope it will be rewarding with everybody, and I'm sure it will be seeing Michelle's work. I will just say a couple of words to introduce Michelle, and we'll have a little brief conversation. I will say that we will see some images of her work, as well as the very beginning, a short video clip, excerpt from one of her video pieces. But just so you know, there is space available for you on the chat in the YouTube Live to make comments or ask questions, and we'll get to those questions and comments and share them with Michelle at the end of the talk. So, but feel free to add those as we go along, and just we really welcome your participation in the event today. So, just to say a couple quick words about Michelle. We met actually about 8 years ago when I was doing a visiting artist thing, and when she was in graduate school at RISD. Michelle is from Dallas, but grew up here, but then went to undergraduate school in California at Pepperdine and graduate school at RISD, which is where I met her. And I knew immediately, how special her work was, and what how intensely interesting I found it immediately. So it's a real pleasure to connect with her in this context. Michelle has shown greatly all over the country, and as well as all over the world, in Japan, notably in Warsaw and in Paris, as well as across the country. She has just had a show in Los Angeles at Night Gallery, and currently has work in the large exhibition at the Rachofsky Warehouse. So the work is seen quite a lot and deserves to be seen more. So it's a real treat to have her be in conversation with us. As I say, please do, as the images come up when she's sharing some of her work with us, please add some comments or questions if you have them, and we'll get to them. So it's an easy time to sort of take notes as you go along. We're really happy to have you here. I will ask Michelle to say a couple of brief words to introduce herself with some ideas, and then we will spend a few minutes seeing some examples of her work, and then she and I will have a brief conversation. So, Michelle, so good to see you. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about sort of anything you want as far as your little sort of biographical things you want to share with us, and maybe like how you ended up where you are currently, and where things are, as a brief introduction to for us to see some images, and we'll start there.
Okay. Yeah, I think one of the trickiest things about being an artist is just figuring out how to situate yourself and where you work best and what you need around you to make your work and stuff. So it's been a long evolution for me. As you said, I grew up in Dallas, and I wanted to get far away from Texas for undergrad, so I went out to California. And I've sort of lived all over. I lived in the Northeast for a while and abroad. And so it's just been, I think over my evolution since college, it's just been kind of moving around and also working on jobs, teaching a little bit, and going to residencies, going to graduate school, and just kind of adapting and figuring out like what the work is that I want to make, and then what I kind of need around it. I lived in New York briefly for about a year and a half, and it wasn't quite the right fit for me. And so I moved home to Dallas for about 5 years, and then decided I needed a break from that as well. So I recently, like at the end of 2019, moved out here to New Mexico, to Santa Fe, where I'm living now. And I was sort of guided by just the legacy of New Mexico artists, and that being sort of a historical alternative to the model of New York or Europe or LA. And I think it's part of sort of like a mystical, spiritual path that artists have followed as well that sort of intrigued me. So I wanted to experience that for myself and see how that would affect my practice. And I'm somebody who needs a lot of time and space around me and a lot of solitude, so it's been a good fit. So that's where I am now.
Yeah, I've only been to Santa Fe once, but I really liked it, and I certainly understand what you mean as far as the kind of just the isolation, or not, not even like enforced isolation that we're in now, but just the sort of feeling of being able to be in your headspace to create and things like that. So it makes sense that you're there. When I first heard you were going, it made sense to me. So that's good. That's good. I didn't mention that earlier. I know that you taught for a while at SMU. Have you taught other places?
No, I did a little teaching when I was like at RISD in grad school, like as a TA, but that's it. I taught one time in Dallas for a junior high in a school in Pleasant Grove, a little Catholic school, and I did that for a year, and so that was cool. So I've had kind of a different experience, like teaching college and teaching grade school. And
yeah. Well, just so you know, one of your former students, Diamond, says hello, so as well. So.
Oh, really?
Good.
That makes me so happy, Diamond.
Yeah. Well, maybe it's a good time for us to see some images. Just so the audience knows, I think you're beginning with a short video clip. Is that right?
It'll be like the second image.
Okay. But so. Most images will just be still images, but there will be a little bit of video as well. So anyway, so everybody, for a little treat, we'll begin with some images of your work. So go ahead.
Okay. So I wanted to start with this piece. I made this in graduate school, and it was one of the first more mature art pieces I remember making, in the sense that it encapsulated a lot of my interests going forward. I took this sort of awkwardly cropped, scanned in PDF of my senior year yearbook page and sent it out to be made into a giant tapestry. I was thinking about the kinds of art we can get made now online, how we can get any object kind of customized or personalized. And then I was also thinking about the kinds of ubiquitous portraiture that we encounter in our day-to-day lives. The kind of portraiture that marks who we are in our local community, where we go to school, where we work, institutions or organizations that we're affiliated with. So it seemed to me as though the structure of this yearbook page was sort of like a map or an exploded view of the egoic self and the components of sort of the egoic self. And also I was thinking about the notion about the kind of like Lacanian symbolic self. So who we are in the world in terms of cultural signifiers or labels, things like what our name is, how we look, the kind of culture we belong to, who we socialize with, a kind of interests or hobbies we have. And there's a sense that those things become increasingly important to our identity and our concept of self as we get older. I remember feeling when I was around this age a deep conflict about sort of this external reality or this fact-based version of ourselves, and then personally my subjective sense of self and who I was and how I saw the world. And it seemed as though both of those things couldn't simultaneously be true at the same time. And so I was always thinking about like what is truth and how do we know what is true and what ultimately matters. I was also thinking about just the sense of malleable identity we have when we're adolescents, the kind of ways that it can feel very like dark and nebulous and scary within our subjective self, and how it can feel comforting to reach out in the external world for an identity that feels kind of recognizable and more knowable. So I was actually looking at previous yearbook pages of young women who had gone to my high school, and I was literally pulling their quotes and kind of writing my blurb in the way they had written theirs. Um, and so in that way, to me, this seemed kind of like an unearthed performance, like an after the fact performance, or sort of like an unconscious art performance. And that's important to me because I feel like that's a big motivation in how I approach my work, is that there's sort of an unconscious performativity or a curiosity about kind of another way of thinking or another kind of art that I want to understand. So yeah, as you said, I just wanted to show this short clip of this film I made for my thesis in graduate school. I wanted to kind of reflect on a lot of the experiences I had had as an artist thus far, and sort of a lot of thoughts and realizations I had come to, but they seemed sort of grandiose and a little bit intense, and so I thought it would be more interesting to conduct the interview as though I was kind of a European intellectual speaking in a foreign language. And I really love how when you're watching someone speak in a foreign language and watching the subtitles at the same time, the split that happens is sort of creates kind of a sensual effect, or almost sort of a suspense.
Mm-hmm. Are you happy making art?
Quelquefois, je suis incroyablement contente. Je pense que l'art, c'est découvrir, mais pas se découvrir, c'est se déchiffrer et comprendre le quotidien. Il y a des gens qui disent que l'art, c'est une concentration. Je suis en train de chercher et toi aussi. Et tu sais qu'on a découvert ensemble, et nous intéressera plus que jamais. La sensation de découvert. So this full film is about 8 minutes, and it's mostly filmed in 16mm and then intercut with these clips from Balanchine ballets. And it was actually shown with the Dallas Biennial in 2012 in the online exhibition. So if anyone wants to watch the full film, you can just Google like my name and then art making and like Dallas Biennial or something, and it should come up. But I grew up playing the piano and doing ballet, and so there was something about that kind of classical pursuit of like perfection or virtuosity, or that kind of ongoing practice that has sort of affected the way I structure my art practice today. And so I like using it sort of as a metaphor. When I was growing up, I was always like collecting pictures from magazines and sort of like tearing images out or getting images from online and like creating my own journals or editorials. And I really enjoyed how when you took an image away from its original context, it created sort of an anonymity around it. And there was like a mystery in the image where the image becomes a stand-in for almost like a genre or like a trope of a kind of image we're familiar with. And it's almost as though the specificity of the individual image or the nuance of that is what creates sort of a poignancy around the image. So when I was in graduate school, I realized I had this abiding interest in painting, but it seemed interesting to me to revisit this archive that I had collected for years and sort of use some of these images as a way to like enter into painting. And so it kind of felt to me as though the image kind of instructed me or informed me about how it wanted to be carried out. So it was as though as a painter, I felt like it was my job to sort of listen to the original image and sort of mimic it or like use it as a set of instructions as to like how to paint versus creating my own painting language as an artist. I'm also really interested in art made by teenagers. There's this idea that we have that somehow when we're young and when we're children, our art is very authentic and expressive and thought to be kind of good and pure. And there's this idea that somehow when we hit adolescence, our art becomes more stilted and self-conscious and is generally thought of as just not as good. And I wanted to advocate for like the beauty of teenager art as just as an authentic form of expression, and that sort of impressionistic self or that more self-conscious self as it begins to look to the outside world is just as beautiful. When I was in Amsterdam, like a lot of people, I visited the Anne Frank Museum, and I was really struck by her preserved bedroom and how she had all of these collected images up on her wall near her bed. And to me, it was a really moving experience because that is obviously something I had done as a young teenager. And to see that kind of a similar like impulse or a similar gesture from somebody who lived in a completely different time and place and a completely different circumstance was really moving and really struck me. And this was one of the images that she had in her bedroom. And to me, it was just an advertisement for jam or something. But to me, it kind of reminded me of like early pop art. So I wanted to repaint it. And this painting is actually kind of a bit bigger. It's about like 4 feet tall. But I wanted to repaint it in that style. And then in the archive, in all of the collected images, are also images of art itself, and iconic images of art. So this is sort of like from an Ellsworth Kelly, but I like how, again, when it's printed and it's taken out of context, it just becomes an example of a kind of art, not necessarily a specific piece of art. And then there's something about the rainbow that I find to be very poignant as well. It's a cultural symbol that kind of takes a lot of different forms and comes up in a lot of different places. Not only is it a prominent like socio-political symbol for us right now, but it's obviously very kind of like important to the history of art and to the history of visual culture. And then it's also fundamental to science and the natural world. And then we also see it pop up a lot in the classroom and early educational environments. So it's a part of like learning as well. And I think it's really interesting that there's this kind of crossover between the aesthetics of early educational learning environments and then kind of modern art or once avant-garde art. And there's this idea that kind of these once avant-garde gestures almost become wholesome once they get absorbed by like design. This piece is a bit smaller. It's like actually like all of these individually painted cradled frames that have been hung together. And then at the same time, I was also just playing around with some more open-ended, ambiguous forms of abstraction. Abstraction that spoke to kind of the history of the 20th century and process and touch and color and materials and the fragility of those things. And then also playing with more contemporary languages around abstraction. And then this is just to show the relative size of some of these paintings. They're pretty small generally, just with a few exceptions. The Ellsworth Kelly one's like a lot bigger, but they tend to be the scale of the paintings tends to mimic what the original image sort of was or what it refers to. But again, I'm just sort of interested in these like kind of cultural icons that speak to like teenage identity or kind of modernist design tropes. There was a brief period of time where my computer was glitching and I started painting the images of my paintings as they were on my screen glitching. So you can see it's like the same image between this and this. So one of my first major kind of solo exhibition experiences was in Warsaw, Poland. This was in 2015. And at the time, I was still working in this way where it was sort of about this kind of random assortment of images from my archive. And I wanted to play with these images that had wildly different origins and kind of very different aims as well, but just how they felt sequenced and juxtaposed with each other. And then I also painted the wall to kind of look like, again, like an early educational environment, or maybe the type of design you might see. It's sort of like maybe the children's wing of a hospital, or like the educational part of a museum. This is a digital collage I made to sort of mimic the way my journals had looked when I was younger. And then around the same time, I started making these pixel paintings that were sort of about, again, sort of a 20th century legacy of abstraction. And I was just taking a ruler and like individually marking off the squares and then individually like mixing color and kind of painstakingly coloring in all the squares. But there's a sense that it's quite different because these aren't monumental paintings. These are really small. This is probably only about 10 inches tall. And then there's something also about these that feels a little bit more open-ended and spiritual as well. In 2017, I did an exhibition at And Now in Dallas. There was an old space at the Cedars that it started out as, and I made the stall that was sort of meant to like look like it was me when I was like 7 or 8. And I got a wig online and I like cut the hair and I bought some clothes on Etsy. This is how it looked when you entered into the space. And it's sort of very awkwardly, crudely hand sewn with stuffing and fabric. And then the other effects or accessories that the doll comes with are actually sort of my personal, like, I don't know, like, these were things that belonged to me when I was. And then these like notebooks and folders and binders and stuff actually have like homework in it from school. And it's like their calendars, and it's some of my art also that I made when I was in elementary school. And also for this exhibition, I wanted to play around with showing fragments of my archive itself. And I was trying to figure out how to display it and what the best way to show it would be. And it felt like just using the wall itself as a framing device was the most direct way. And then I was also thinking back to that experience in the Anne Frank Museum and that gesture of just putting things on your wall. And there was also something about the tactility of the paper, that these things were sort of fragile artifacts that I wanted to get across to the viewer. So there's a sense that they could like kind of experience that a little bit more just with this direct placing them on the wall. So there's this drawing in the lower right-hand corner. I actually made when I was in elementary school and found later, and I don't remember why I drew it or what it was about, but it just says I was dead in my seat over and over again. And then there's a drawing on the lower left hand of this image that is actually made by Francisco Moreno, a Dallas artist who I went to school with. And it was like a gift he had given me. We would always like trade drawings and stuff. And then there's like bits of, just like ephemera and stickers and fabric, or like pages torn out of textbooks. And then also displayed are incredibly tiny markings that just, it's really hard to have it show up in an installation photograph, but there's things that are important to me that are just, yeah, very, very tiny gestures. And then I remember thinking back to like elementary school, and people would make these like paintings or drawings on bathroom stalls. It's like they were like weird scrawls or just scribbles or graffiti or something. And so I wanted to make a painting on the wall that looked a little bit like that. That same year, I did an exhibition at Shane Campbell Gallery in Chicago. They had an apartment gallery or space that they would use for sort of smaller exhibitions. This is a digital painting I made on Photoshop that I printed on silk. So also this idea of sort of kind of performing or channeling a familiar genre. And then this is actually it's a painting made with like enamel poured into a custom made frame. And then this is a pretty small piece, but it kind of simultaneously was like a Microsoft logo and then sort of just a modernist abstract painting. And then again, something that feels like it could be in an early educational environment. For my second exhibition at Raster, I was, again, this is in Poland. I was in this larger space at their gallery, and I wanted, again, to experiment with like alternative ways to display this archive. So I made all of these screens, and it's as though the screens kind of grow up in size, and as they grow up, the content on the screen changes a bit. But this feels to me like it's like sort of the infancy screen. And then these are Shopkins, and I cut them out of fabric and hand sewed them into this silk. And then I was also experimenting with hand dyeing the fabric. And then this is the largest one, and it's really colorful, but it's just almost impossible, again, for it to show up in images. But it's like painted again with the silk dye, and then it's like embroidered. And then back in Dallas for my second exhibition at And Now, this was in 2018. I wanted to scale up some of the images that I was interested in and see what it would be like to really focus in on one image and spend a lot of time with it. This is from like a tarot card, and to me it kind of feels like it could be a stained glass window. There's something about these images and like sort of the awkward way they're illustrated that I find really moving. There's sort of this attempt to reach this sort of ineffable esoteric wisdom, but there's also simultaneously sort of like a banality or something to these cards. And then this is an image I found on a hospital pamphlet that is just a beautiful design and also kind of reminds me of like the Save the Children logo. And here, I guess I'll say that I also purposefully, the canvas was kind of stained and dirty and also not totally stretched. This is a large monochromatic abstract painting, kind of in the style of some of my earlier works, but just again scaled up. And then this was an advertisement I had found in a magazine where I think the conceit was to blur these images of women that are supposed to be sort of on the street shots of female celebrities. And the painting itself was pretty, I want to say it's like 5.5 feet tall. So it's pretty large, and to that scale, it sort of reminded me of like we were descending the staircase, or like the Richter version of that painting.
Mm-hmm.
And then in 2019, I started, as someone who was always looking at magazines when I was young and collecting images, I was really interested a lot in fashion as well, just because you find some of the most interesting images that way. And for the first time, I actually kind of went back to fashion a little bit and was using some images from the fashion world for my paintings. And these are from, there's a Danish designer called Cecily Bonson, and a lot of her images, both her garments and the images around the shows and around the advertising, kind of feel very impressionistic, and they remind me of like Degas paintings. So I thought it would be interesting to kind of channel that impulse and paint in that way, and like, what would those types of subjects look like in contemporary art? I was also thinking about like Bert Morisot paintings of women like dressed up to go to the opera, and how it's interesting the way we look at impressionist subjects now is that it feels very aristocratic or something. And so it felt like this was sort of a contemporary image of like this aristocratic kind of experience. And then around the paintings were again like bits of ephemera and little touches of this installation on the wall. These were very, very small objects. This is on the ground. And then I did a presentation for Frieze New York last May that ended up being a digital presentation due to COVID. But I wanted to continue with that series from that same sort of grouping of images. But these felt a little bit more like they were about the history of sort of Northern European Flemish painting, where it's a little bit more about this kind of solitary interior space, and light and how light reflects on fabric, and also sort of a tighter rendering of fabric in the woman. And then, as Stephen mentioned, I'm part of an exhibition that's on view right now in Dallas at the Warehouse called Psychic Wounds, and it's curated by Gavin Delahunty. So for that exhibition, I recreated sort of a similar mural as what I had done at Now in 2017. paintings have continued to progress as well and develop. This one's a bit bigger than the original ones I showed you. It's about like maybe 2 or 2.5 feet tall. And then also in that same room with the painting and the mural, I showed this doll again. And then Stephen also mentioned an exhibition I have up in LA right now. And so these are just some images from that to close the presentation. So again, looking a little bit to the world of fashion, trying to play with what I feel like I can get away with in that regard, without feeling too obvious, I guess. I was looking at some images from a recent Chanel fashion show. So the women or the models were like at the Grand Palais in Paris, and around the models was like kind of an artificial garden. So yeah, that's it.
Great.
I see if I can. Okay.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Great survey of the work. Thank you. Gave me a lot to think about. Probably, hearing you talk about them as opposed to just going through them myself, and gave me a lot of other things to think about than some of the things I started thinking about on my own. But I want to start with something that is seemingly very plain and kind of boring question, but I've always been struck by your, very precise decisions about size and scale. And I think that for some people, I think, a lot of the installation shots you gave us help to clarify some of those decisions. But I'd just like you to maybe start with some of the ways in which you decide which pieces are going to be sort of, let's say, one-to-one exactly the size of the thing you're borrowing from or using as source, to places where you're enlarging and those kinds of questions. I think there's a real intimacy to a lot of your work, and a lot of places where you're talking about psychological and emotional places that are very quiet and kind of, like you said, like when you're talking about sort of emotions that are experienced in adolescence, kind of like, not sort of the big moment, but sort of the behind the thing. And I think a lot of times for me, as I've known your work over the years, pardon me, that I think sometimes some of the decisions you've made about where you place some of these objects, how big they are, how they relate proportionally to the rooms, all speak to a kind of empathy and a kind of intimacy in the space. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts about things like that. So.
When you were talking about the decisions about size, it's interesting because what I realized is that it's not so much that, sometimes it's not so much that the original image that I'm borrowing from dictates the size, but what the image is supposed to refer to almost in history. So there's a sense that like Pearl Vision advertisement, again, it felt to me like it could be like a giant Richter painting.
Yeah.
And that these, images from like a Chanel fashion show feel more like Renoirs or something, and so they need to be smaller. So I think that's a big part of the decisions, is like, what is the nature of these images if they were to be painting, if they were to be recycled back into painting? What size would that painting be or something?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's more rare for me to make a large object. I tend to be pretty sensitive to like paintings feel to me like they're very oppressive in a way. Like I don't actually personally live with a lot of art. So I'm very sensitive to like these things as objects in space, and so um, yeah, and I guess I'm personally intrigued sometimes by the power of smaller images also in a space. Some of my favorite artists tend to work maybe on a smaller scale. Um, I also feel like the way we're living now is just different. We're all living a little bit more of, I don't know, lives where we're moving more and maybe we're living in smaller spaces, at least if you live in like a large city or something like that. And so I'm sensitive to like those types of needs or something. And I just also feel like we've been through an era of art where things were so scaled up so massively and so gargantuan, and that like, art spaces were made for that for a while. But I don't feel like that's as interesting anymore or as much of a territory that needs to be explored. And yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think there's a way in which I feel like you are, you're talking about like some things being almost scaled to a point where they're sort of bullying or oppressive, and they're sort of, like in your face kind of way that a lot of large works of art are and have been for a long time in the sort of like mega market world of these big giant things. And I think there's a way in which the size and scale and intimacy of what you're doing is almost speaking for both with a voice that is with a quiet voice, but also with a voice that is for speaking for somebody who maybe can't have their voice heard. So that's why I don't know, there's just, as I've seen your work over the years, there's something about the size and scale of things that has, like I say, this intimacy that seems to be very much about the kind of way in which you are saying something about a scale of power as well. So.
Totally, and that's also, it's not about, again, it's not about trying to overwhelm the viewer. It's about a personal absorption or like interiority, or like a way of using appropriation and as a more like trying to understand one's own subjectivity or something like that. And so as being something that's more about an interiority versus like, I don't know, this overt intense form of expression or something, it just makes sense that they're kind of smaller and more intimate. It's almost as though the motivation of the paintings is different. And then like also I forgot to say, technically my paintings took a long time to make, and so I think being able to work smaller, I tend to like that more because I can really take a longer time with one particular image. It's hard to like scale up that amount of work,
Yeah, no, of course.
It becomes almost impossible to like actually be able to do that amount of work, I think.
Also on the kind of practical, physical side, I'm just curious, you've talked about tearing things from magazines and archives and those kinds of things. Can you tell us a little bit about what your just physical, and you talk about like moving around a lot and things like that, and just where do you still look at magazines? Are you tearing things out now? Where are things kept? I mean, how are you enormously meticulous as far as where these years are? I mean, whatever 8th grade images are all together, or are they all in boxes somewhere? How does that work? I'm just curious.
Yeah, it's really unorganized. I just have like maybe 5 or 6 big boxes, like archival boxes, and just everything goes in there together. I'm a little bit more conscious about what I collect now, like knowing what I'm gonna want to use. So I actually like go online now and I like buy a lot of things. Like I buy a lot of stickers or fabric and things like that, knowing that I'm probably going to end up wanting to use it at some point. And then just the types of images I collect now are a lot different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I go through the collection a lot though and throw things away and edit things out because it just becomes like too much. But yeah, I tend to be more interested now in more ambiguous images or like abstract images or just things that are a little bit more about like tactility in terms of like how color looks when it's printed on paper or like I said, fabric or something like that. And so I look a lot online, but the things I collect online now, I'll print it onto fabric and I experiment with like different kinds of printing, like in different kinds of fabric and how that looks. So yeah, I still go sometimes to like old like bookstores and stuff like that and like look at magazines, and I still look at like contemporary magazines and newspapers and textbooks and stuff like that. But I would say almost now, yeah, the majority of like images are found online. It's both, though.
How much? What do you think the balance is between the things that reflect you wanting to comment about the world around you, and how much of it is commentary on you and your experiences? How autobiographical is the work?
Yeah. It maybe is autobiographical, but if it is, like I said, it's very like unconscious or something. It's more, I feel like it's more that I'm living vicariously through other images and looking at those and sort of channeling that experience or something.
Yeah.
So I'm using appropriation or whatever. I guess that's like the technical term for it. But it's not. I'm not using it in a critical capacity. You know, it's not to sort of like, analyze in a critical way the world around me. It's more, it is an attempt, I think, to understand myself. So yeah, it's different. It's like a different way of using appropriation or something than I think it was used, I think, in the 70s, 80s, 90s.
Yeah, no, it's
more like an internal exploration or something.
Yeah, it's funny because I don't really see it in the same way that I know you mentioned like you had a couple of images that are distinctly from advertising, and then things that whatever, but I don't see it necessarily as a kind of pop strategy, nor is it necessarily the way in which the sort of classic sort of 80s appropriation kind of thing is. So it's a distinct kind of borrowing that is about that sort of cultural moment, which makes me wonder, as you're borrowing from certain both specific sociological and sort of cultural the specificity of that, what has been your experience as you've shown internationally so much? I mean, how are things received in European context or Asian or different parts across the country, things like that? Have you had much, just what are your feelings or thoughts about the ways in which you've geared what you do towards a specific kind of like where the audience is, where the show is going to be received? Have you given any thought to that?
Yeah, I try not to do that, but I feel like in a way it does affect what I show. Like when I showed in Tokyo, I think it did sort of affect some of the choices I made and the group of paintings I ended up bringing.
We're close.
And I really love that because I was actually there and I was just like watching people like interact with my paintings like all the way on the other side of the world.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
It
yeah.
was so cool. Like why? Like, and I felt like there was like a connection being made, and it made me feel really good. And then my experience in Poland has been pretty interesting because when I did that show with the screens,
Yeah.
the show was called like Girl Talk, and it was sort of after like an old board game that it used to exist in like the 90s. And then there was also like a musician, like a DJ called Girl Talk that I really
Yeah,
liked.
exactly. Yeah,
I
right,
think
right.
because of that, the show seemed to sort of have like a feminist like slant or something, and that was interesting too because of just the political climate in Poland. I don't think that would really be a topic of discussion as much in the U.S., but in Poland, like it made a big impact on some women that came to see it, and they wanted to talk about ideas around the work in a different way, and so that was really interesting and really like rewarding.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That makes sense. Well, we want to hear, what's coming next and things like that. I'm sure some people will ask about that as well. And we will put on, it's easy to find you, I know, on the internet, et cetera, but we'll also post some things in the YouTube as well, ways in which people can do some more research on your work. Want to give some opportunity for some of the audience to make some comments and ask some questions. I'm going to segue over to my colleague Matt Clark, who will be able to read the screen as the questions that have been coming in. And I will just say thank you much, and it's great to see you, and I hope we can see each other in person soon. So, all right, so take care. We'll talk soon. Okay.
Michelle,
Hi.
thank you so much for sharing your art with us today. We've had a lot of response and some good questions, but I'm kind of changing directions where Stephen took you, because I'm interested in where you started and how you started. And did you have any defining moments when you were young that, hey, I woke up and I want to be an artist, or anything like that? What were you thinking when you were young?
I decided to be, or I kind of became conscious of like a desire to be an artist like in college. So it felt like it was like more a later kind of, when I was in high school, I was more interested in sort of like drama and performance and like music and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And so I was a little lost, and when I was in college, I had a philosophy professor who was like, I really feel like you are an abstract thinker, but you're not an academic, you're not like a discursive thinker. And he was like, have you ever thought about making art? Like, I feel like you think like an artist. And I didn't take that as any offense. I recognized truth in it. And I told him like, I love art, but I haven't really connected with any of my teachers or professors that I've ever had. And he was like, well, you should take a class with this one professor. I think you would like him. And once I hooked up with the right person, it felt very different to me, and it felt like a lot more mature. And I kind of recognized my own motivations and my own instincts in him and our interaction together. And then after that, I sort of, the idea of being an artist like had never occurred to me before. And once it did occur to me, I realized that was like what I wanted to do.
Well, what a nice gift that you found a professor that could kind of give you some guidance or direction. I think we all need those kind of people in our lives, and the importance of finding mentors is so big.
Yeah.
What are some other things that you did when you started out? So you found out, okay, this is the direction I want to go in. What were some breakthroughs or opportunities that happened, and how did those come about early on in your creative career?
It's very incremental, and I just feel like I've always believed that whatever opportunity you have, if you just work as hard as you can, like something will come from it. If nothing else, just you'll learn something about like yourself and your interests. And so it just was a really, really gradual process. But I'm a really patient person by nature, so luckily I've been able to just continue to like have hope and believe. And I think what's interesting too is that once you get into the right art community, things happen very organically. Um, as I said, I didn't feel very happy living in New York, for instance, but once I moved to Dallas, it was sort of like the right place for my work, and I met a lot of people through there, and it's like you meet one person and then 10 other people, you know, will open up from just like this one, like, yeah, so it just kind of is an exponential kind of experience, I think, being an artist. So you just have to like start somewhere. But I don't know, I remember actually in college, I graduated in the winter term instead of the spring. And I ended up somehow, there was another artist that was graduating that semester as well, but she kind of like dropped out, like the exhibition, our graduation exhibition. And so I ended up having my undergrad, like graduation exhibition at the museum on campus, like all by myself. It was kind of wild, and I had to like fill that whole space and was in this museum where they were showing all of these like famous artists and stuff. So for some reason that experience really like impacted me, and it kind of felt like it was just something that I wouldn't have even had if I had gone to like art school. It just felt like a lot of responsibility to have, even as an undergrad, and so that experience kind of like made a big impression on me, I think.
What a great opportunity early on.
I'm sorry?
I said, what a great opportunity early on.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm going to ask some questions now from the audience. So Zach Cousteau asks, you mentioned that you moved around a fair bit. So how much does your living environment affect the direction of your work? Does the city you live in ever feel restricting to your creative vibes?
Yeah, totally. Gosh, I don't want to like talk badly about any cities or something, but I did live in Boston for a while, and I found that the culture there, I didn't feel like it was super creative, but it was pretty interesting to be there for a while. And then, yeah, like living in New York, I think logistically just felt very difficult. I'm somebody who works very spontaneously, and like I'll just need to like go to the store really quickly to grab something. And you know, I think in New York you really have to like schedule everything like way in advance, and it takes like 2 or 3 hours to run a short errand sometimes. So that was just like hard, and it was also kind of distracting too, just because of like you feel like a lot of social obligations living there. Like a lot of your friends will have an opening, and you need to go to that, but you also you finally have a moment to work and you want to do that. So you just always feel sort of like torn and distracted. And I found that a little bit difficult, and found it to be a little bit of a relief to be in Dallas, where I could just focus on my work more and there wasn't as much social pressure. But that's just me. I mean, I think that, I don't know, like every artist is different, and just whatever inspires you.
Right. And now being in Santa Fe, a pretty quiet place, naturally beautiful, I'm sure that affects you in a different way. And then I wonder if Corona and the whole kind of isolation and shutdown how has that affected your work?
I've perversely found it to be a little bit of a relief, just personally, because I think the art world sort of like it's just such an accelerated like calendar throughout the year, with like art fairs and all of like different shows that come up. And so it was nice to just like have a moment to breathe, and maybe there wasn't as much, like, it felt like things slowed down a little bit. But obviously that's not to minimize the huge impact it's had on
Right.
on people. I mean, but I personally, it felt kind of nice to just be able to like take a break from, I think, just the pace of things.
Sure,
So-
sure, absolutely. Really Jazzy Bell wants to know, how do you choose what medium you use for each work?
I do work in different media, but I consider myself largely a painter, and that's not much of a decision because I'm just interested in like oil painting, and I tend to use kind of the same materials. I use linen.
So what's your favorite brand of paint? What oil paint do you use?
I use Old Holland.
Old Holland, okay.
So,
Good.
yeah.
Good brand. Sam Marie wants to know, do you designate time for coming up projects, or do you designate time for coming up with new projects or ideas, or do those ideas just manifest on their own?
I think Stephen was saying it depends on the context in the show, and I think different opportunities will sort of like, I'll respond to that differently. So I think it's more that first it's sort of like an opportunity that comes up, and I tend to make work for a specific context or venue or opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
But I also tend to do a lot of research before I start painting. So I do like look through my personal collected images, or I'm online a lot looking at images. So there is a long process of like making decisions before I start like painting, if that answers the question.
Sure. Ellie would like to know, she asked, what made you decide to make screens? I'm very interested with how delicate and simplistic and well crafted they are. Could you talk more about the material you use and how you felt about that direction that you went in?
Yeah, well, thank you, first of all. I really appreciate that they come across that way. I think I said before, but I love textiles and fabric, and so I found this beautiful, that silk, like see-through fabric I found at the store in Houston, actually. And I was with my friend who is a designer, and she like picked it out for me, and I don't think I would have been able, I wouldn't have even noticed it myself, but she really has an eye for fabric as well. And so it was just really inspiring, and yeah, I love juxtaposing this like very, very like kind of expensive, luxurious silk fabric with these like cotton Shopkins fabric that like I found at Michael's or Joann's or something like that. So yeah, I don't know. It didn't feel too different from painting, I guess. It felt like it was just a process of sort of formal decisions. Yeah.
Great. Felicity Ferry wants to know what else you do. So besides making art, how do you spend your time?
Well, like I said in the past, I've taught and I've kind of had other jobs and stuff like that. But right now, I'm just a full-time artist, so it's mainly what I do, like every day. I don't know. I love to read, and I'm trying to like continue to teach myself French right now.
Oui, oui.
Yeah, so I'm also sort of like, I've gotten into like, I don't know, sort of like tarot and metaphysical like stuff as well. So I've been teaching myself how to like read tarot cards recently.
I'm sure you can find some help in Santa Fe too.
Yeah.
We just have a couple more minutes in, and I'm always interested in if you were to go back to your undergraduate days, what advice would you give to yourself?
What
would you do different? Or
yeah, what would I do differently?
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember one of the difficult things for me was that once I realized I wanted to be an artist, I was pretty sure of that. Intuitively, it felt right. But I also remember, like, it felt like I didn't understand why I wanted to paint. For some reason, that also felt like the right thing, but I didn't particularly feel like my paintings were good, or that my art was good, or that I was a particularly good painter, or anything like that. But I just had this feeling that it was the right thing intuitively. But I was really in a lot of conflict because I just didn't understand that, and it created a lot of self-doubt and insecurity. And so, I guess looking back, I would probably just be a little bit more confident and just trust my intuition a bit more. Because I think I held back a lot too, because I just didn't understand it. Like, it just didn't make sense to me. But I don't know. But I think that it was the right decision for me. So I would probably just do more and be more confident or something.
So all those students out there, confidence, right? So important.
Yeah, you know what, I do actually, if you're just asking for general advice, here's the thing, I think that our culture is not set up for it to be easy to be an artist today. There's a lot of things working against you, but you're not alone in that. I think every artist deals with that. But I think that staying positive is sort of like, I found that that's my secret, is just to stay positive and believe that there's people out there that are gonna care about what you're doing. And it's true, like, if you work hard and you believe in it, and believe in what you're doing, people will care.
What are you working on now? What's the future for you? What are you excited about?
I am gonna have another show in Dallas this spring. So if you guys are still around in Dallas this spring, come to that. It'll be at Now, I think in maybe April. So I'm working on a new set of paintings for that, but I don't really want to say what they are yet. And then continuing to work with some other galleries and spaces as well next year.
Wonderful. We are so appreciative of your time and sharing your art today. Thank you so much, Michelle. Whoever's interested out there to learn more about Michelle's artwork, their website will be posted up here shortly, so go check her out there. Also, we have another upcoming virtual artist visit with Fahamu Peku. That will be this coming Monday, the 19th at 12:30. There'll be a flyer that will show up here shortly, so please attend and join us for that. Again, Michelle, it's been a great time having a short chat with you. I know Stephen thoroughly enjoyed the chat, and just thank you for sharing your time, your thoughts, and your paintings with all of us today.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And thank you all out there who joined us and watched. Again, we hope to see you next Monday. We'll continue on with the virtual series with Fahamu Peku, Atlanta-based artist. We'll be taking it live from Conduit Gallery, where he will be showcasing his most recent paintings. Thank you all.